Hi everyone, welcome to the May 10th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and this is the Kentucky Derby weekend recap episode as we look back on the first Saturday in May and the first Friday in May, as we talk a little about the Oaks card as well. But Craig, I'll bring you in right away. The focus is the Kentucky Derby and the massive upset that we saw unfold in early evening on Saturday. Feel like everybody's kind of still processing what happened and trying to look through the history books to find some past precedent or corollary for what we saw on Saturday, and there aren't too many. This probably has to be considered one of the biggest upsets in racing history.
Yeah, that was something, and it was, it's kind of why I was watching the race, and I kind of picked the horse out, and I was like, who is that? Because you could kind of see him weaving through horses, and then when he actually got in the clear, I was like, oh no, not that I was upset about it or anything, just that it was such a big surprise to see that it was Rich Strike with the, he had that odd colored saddle cloth, and yeah, it's hard to think, certainly in a Kentucky Derby, of an upset that big. There hasn't been one that I remember in my lifetime. I guess Mind That Bird would be the closest, but it was something to behold to see that run. And, I guess it's kind of, a lot of us have harkened back to the days when sprinters entered the Kentucky Derby. And that's kind of what we got in the horse from Dubai. He was just a sprinter. He went out there, he went crazy fast, and it just kind of blew the race apart. So, make of it what you will, but I thought it was kind of a fun race. Obviously, I didn't cash any tickets on it, but, it's a race that happens once a year, and I enjoyed it for what it was.
Yeah, you would imagine that very few people who are using traditional handicapping methods cashed tickets on this Derby. It was a very difficult one to come up with. I heard of some non-racing person whose lucky number is 21. You never get to bet the 21 really anywhere in horse racing, but the Kentucky Derby, I guess this year you did with the horse drawing in. So, I mean, maybe if you used, some numerology, you could get there, but no, it was a massive upset. You mentioned Mind That Bird. I guess Mind That Bird was a little bit less surprising, maybe not so much in the way that he did it, because Mind That Bird I think he won that Derby by almost 6 lengths in extremely impressive fashion. That was surprising, but he did have Calvin Borel aboard. There was that angle for it. It's really hard to find too many angles to come up with Rich Strike at all. It was a huge shock. Connections, trainer, owner, jockey that are really not household names, even for people that are hardcore followers of racing. So a lot to dissect to kind of, reason or explain how we got here, Craig. There were some reactions late in the evening on Saturday night, I'm sure, from a lot of people who had losing tickets on the Kentucky Derby or perhaps thought they were a winner at the 8th pole that were throwing around some maybe careless rhetoric about this horse or the way the Connections might have won this race. But as you were alluding to, there was a just complete and total pace meltdown, and when that happens, when the leaders go so fast on the front end, it creates chaos, and you do see things like this happen. Maybe not to this extent in a race like the Kentucky Derby all the time, but this is what you need to produce this kind of upset.
Yeah, you do. And I will say TimeformUS had this horse with the top late pace rating, and I didn't even know that. I was told on Twitter by some people, so I do know some people that actually hit the race because of it. But for me, the guy that makes the numbers, it was still a reach to come up with. But, that's what happens. Like you said, we get chaos. The fractions are all in red. I think we had the second fastest opening half mile since TimeformUS has come about, and our figures actually go back all the way to 2004, and it was a 169. The only quicker one was Justify's 170, and that came over a sloppy track, so it's kind of comparing apples to oranges. On a fast track, this was the quickest, and you can just look at the chart and see where the horses were early that finished, and I think the top 7 horses were all outside of Epicenter, who was a sort of close 8th. I wouldn't even say he was part of the pace. Everybody else came from well in the back of the field.
Yeah, I want to dissect that a little bit, Craig. I was actually looking back at some past Kentucky Derby charts in the TimeformUS PPs, and a lot of people were talking about Palace Malice as Kentucky Derby, or I should say, the pace that Palace Malice set in the Derby that Orb won back in 2013 as maybe being a corollary to this, another pace collapse. Palace Malice got a 165 pace rating for the opening quarter mile. As you said, Summers Tomorrow got a 169, so this was even slightly faster than that. Another Derby that fell apart. And as you said, that was another sloppy track derby. We haven't seen too many fall apart to this extent on a fast track. And we had talked about it. You had certainly sounded the bell about Summer is Tomorrow being a horse that could really mess with the Americans, having run so fast in his preps overseas. And that proved to be the case here. They were on a mission, and it really it just cooked anybody who was near that pace. And I've seen a lot of people making the point that Epicenter probably ran the best race in this Derby, but almost talking about Epicenter like he was right up in that pace. And maybe that's where people expected him to be, but I would advise people who think he was there to go back and watch the race, because like you were saying, Craig, Epicenter was back at 8th early. He was a good 5 lengths off the early lead as they were going by that opening quarter mile. Now, 5 lengths was too close to the pace in this Kentucky Derby, but it's not like Epicenter got a wildly different trip than Zandon did, the third place finisher. They were never separated by more than 3 lengths at any point in this race. For most of the race, Epicenter and Zandon were just a length and a half to 2 lengths apart. Flavien Prat was pretty aggressive with Zandon to make sure that he did not get that far back, and that might have ultimately proved to be his undoing, because I think his connections, in getting so concerned about having this horse pass too many, they got him too close to the pace. But both of these horses, I thought Epicenter and Zandon ran similar races, arguably ran the 2 best races, but unsurprisingly, they just didn't have any answer in the final 8th when Rich Strike, who got an amazing ride from Sonny Leone, came up the rail to beat them.
Yeah, it's I don't want to get too carried away with Epicenter for the reasons you said. People assumed he was going to get a way bigger figure than Rich Strike because of the pace adjustment that we do. But you don't get as much credit when you're back in 8th, 5 lengths behind. It's just not the same as being part of the pace. And I could even make the argument that he actually had a pretty great trip, especially for a Kentucky Derby, and just got run down. Yeah, he was probably going faster than he was comfortable, but you're not going to get a much better trip from the 3 posts in the Derby, especially when you rate back. So he only got a 1 point better figure. Part of it, too, is a 10 furlong distance. We just don't give as much credit at that longer distance. So I thought he ran fine, but I wasn't going to get carried away with it. I mean, it was a career best number for him, a couple points higher than his Louisiana Derby. And I got no argument with people who say he was the best, but it's not like he was 5 lengths better than everybody else, in my opinion.
Yeah, we should really just kind of hammer home the point. If you haven't gone back and watched the replay and really focused on Rich Strike or seen the overhead shot, it's worth doing, because, I mean, Sonny Leone, you might not have been familiar with him as a rider. I know I sure wasn't coming into this Derby, but he just made every right move, Craig. I mean, you could see coming around the far turn that he had a ton of horse. So did Irad Ortiz on Mo Donegal, but Irad decided to go outside of horses, and Sonny Leone just kind of sat on the inside, tried to follow the right horses into the stretch so that opening would be there for him when they started to separate coming past the quarter pole, and that's exactly what happened. It opened up when they turned into the stretch, and he just stuck to the rail, kind of similar to what Calvin Burrell did when he was riding Mind That Bird to win that Derby. Just stayed inside, hoped to get lucky, and that's exactly what happened. Things did open up late as horses tired, and he was able to weave through horses to get there. It was just kind of a magical ride. I mean, it's not the kind of thing you could really draw up because you don't know how the race is going to unfold, but he was just in the right place at every time.
Yeah, and I don't want to knock Irad Ortiz for his race, but if you switch those 2 horses in the rides they got, I would think Mo Donegal would have been right there and probably win the race. It was just one where they have to make second decisions. One guy went outside, one guy decided, and actually moved a little bit sooner as well with Sonny Leone, which I think helped get that position and be able to make that jump. So it was a great ride, and it just goes to show you can get good rides from people you've never heard of. Most of these jockeys are really competent out there. They know what they're doing, and it's in a race like the Derby, it's just going to come down to a couple of those small, quick decisions and finding a little luck, which he made the right decisions and found some luck.
Yeah, for sure. And moving forward, we'll have to see this horse in the Preakness and decide how we're going to assess him. That field has not quite taken shape yet. It seems like a few from the Derby are still on the fence, primarily Epicenter and Zandon, who, as we record this on Tuesday, neither one of them is sure to run to the Preakness. I know that they're both possible to do so. I think their trainers want to see how they come out of this race and whether the 2-week turnaround will work for them. I would imagine if either of those horses go, they'll be shorter prices than Rich Strike. Just, people wanting to see this again. I could understand not trusting the form from this Kentucky Derby, just given the way that pace melted down. But this horse is clearly better than we thought coming into the race. I mean, you can't just pretend that the Derby result didn't happen. I mean, he got a great pace to close into, but he still ran the race that he ran. And clearly, this is a horse that was improving at the right time. We kind of discounted it because he was coming in off those synthetic races, but he's a horse that can run on anything, apparently. And I wouldn't say that he's impossible in the Preakness, but it's going to be a tall order because it's highly unlikely that he gets a similar pace situation.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know what the field's going to look like. I was traveling this week, so I only saw a little bit of a potential list that Pimlico put out, so kind of going to hold off on that. But yeah, I don't think it was like he's just some horse who, can never win another race and got lucky. He showed he ran, and the way he finished off the race was no fluke. I mean, he came home that last quarter really quick, and, I liked what I saw. It turns out the Jeff Ruby Stakes was a pretty good race because the horses out of that, they haven't run bad at all.
Craig, let's move on to the Friday feature at Churchill Downs, the Grade 1 Kentucky Oaks for the 3-year-old fillies, and probably a good transition from talking about the Preakness to this race because we could have a potential Preakness starter in the winner, Secret Oath. We'll get to that in a little bit, but regarding Secret Oath's performance in the Oaks, she just looked like she was a winner every step of the way, Craig. Once she broke well from the rail and Louis Size was able to navigate her off that inside path, get her into the clear, he just rode her like he knew she was the best horse. Wasn't concerned about losing ground coming around that second turn. She got the jump on everybody else, but just really never gave him a chance.
No, and it just showed this is a case where a jockey, I think, did make a difference because I don't think she'd had the best rides in her prior races. I know we covered that pretty extensively, but Louise Saez rode this horse perfectly, did everything right. She ran a career best TimeformUS figure of 116, was able to hold off Ness pretty easily. I would say she got the jump on Ness, but I don't think it's like Ness was ever going to catch her, barring something weird happening. So, I think the best horse won, and it will be interesting to see if she shows up in the Preakness. The 116, I don't know if that's a one that's going to scare the Colts too much, but it just kind of depends who else is going to show up, to be honest.
Yeah, the number is not that far off the number that the Derby got, a 119 versus a 116. Obviously, the runner-up in the Derby did get the highest number, Epicenter getting that 120, but it's still not that big of a difference between the Colts and the fillies based on those races. Clearly, Secret Oath was in a much more conventionally run race in this Oaks. The pace was not, it was on the fast side, but it wasn't the kind of crazy pace that we saw in the Derby the second day. And Secret Oath, she got the right trip, but she was just the best horse on the day. I thought that Irad Ortiz gave Nest a fantastic ride to be second. He saved ground around the turns, traveled into the race well, was able to peel her out at the top of the stretch with plenty of time to make an impact, but at the end of the day, she just wasn't really good enough to get to Secret Oath, and really nobody in this field was in the same league. I thought that Echo Zulu ran a deceptively strong race to be fourth, but she's going to be one that probably wants a turn back in the future.
Yeah, I thought she ran well. She actually got the second best figure with a 115, even though she only finished fourth after dueling with Ugiri in those pretty quick fractions. The pace figures were in the 140s, not Derby level, but still pretty darn fast. So I thought she ran fine, especially considering it was only her second race of the year. So I don't know if I'd write her off for the mile and an eighth races just yet, but she certainly would be a force going shorter. It's just a matter of there's not, I guess the Acorn would be the next big spot. I wouldn't consider the Black Eyed Susan at Pimlico a top race. So it'll be interesting to see if she shows up in New York on Belmont weekend, because she would certainly be a force.
Yeah, and Craig, I don't want to dwell too much on the sentiments of this past weekend, but we are coming off an unusual few years in terms of the Derby, 2019 to 2021, just unusual circumstance after unusual circumstance, from disqualifications to the pandemic and then back to more DQs for drug positives. It was an unusual Derby in the sense that we had that gigantic upset, but it was a satisfying weekend in the sense that you had some really noteworthy storylines coming out of it. From on Friday, the Oaks with Dwayne Lucas winning, I believe, at the age of 86. Lucas also having a major impact on the Derby by withdrawing his horse at the last minute to allow Rich Strike into the race. These unknown connections winning. I was watching the interview with trainer Eric Reed on the Today Show the next day, and it was just, I mean, it was kind of crazy to hear about, this 80-1 horse and him explaining the victory, but at the same time, it was refreshing to see such a normal winning interview after the Kentucky Derby, given the few years that we were coming off. So I don't know. For me, it just felt like a refreshing time in horse racing, despite the unpredictable results.
Yeah, that was actually the very first thing I said on Twitter after the race. Was even though I didn't cash, I can't even be mad about this. As far as from a better standpoint, because it was just kind of a neat story to see a horse nobody had heard of, as you mentioned, in the Oaks, to see Wayne Lucas win his first big race in a long, long time. And there were definitely some good stories, something we can never have enough of in horse racing.
Well, let's move on to talk about some of the other graded stakes action from this past week at Churchill Downs. We're just going to focus on the Oaks and Derby undercards. There's a lot that we could have talked about. There were some big speed figures earlier in the week, but we're going to focus on the stakes races primarily on Friday and Saturday. Beginning with the Derby undercard, the race run right before the Kentucky Derby, Craig, was that Grade 1 Turf Classic. And we should, as we discuss the top two finishers in this race, Santon and Miramichi, discuss a little bit the way the turf was playing this past weekend at Churchill Downs. There obviously was some rain that fell throughout the week, so even though I think it was listed as firm at at different points, it definitely was a course that had some give to it, and it just seemed like, I don't know if it was drawing differently down on the inside as opposed to the outside, but it really appeared that outside paths had the edge late in the week at Churchill Downs.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's something that may affect the figures as well. It's something we haven't talked about in a while, but this course was only rated a 6 on our 1 to 10 scale, which is definitely, I would say, more on the good or even yielding side. And the way we do our figures kind of is based on that track condition. So I need to go back and honestly change it from that firm, because I see some gaps in the charts that I'm really not comfortable with. And that's part of why we do it different, because of track condition. So normally the track condition agrees, but not always. And we've talked about it many times, like at the fairgrounds. I will go back in and manually change that track condition. So I'm going to do that for this day. And it will change these figures a few points at least, maybe 4 or 5 points. But I still think we saw some pretty good performances. And I totally agree with you about I don't think the inside was the best place on the course to be, for sure. It seemed like the wide sweeping move was kind of the way to go. That said, I don't think Santine was overly wide that I remember, but he kind of was early and then made his move late. I thought he ran a good race. He currently has a 128 figure. He's a horse we've talked about many, many times. I would say he's been a little disappointing this year. He had run that huge Hollywood Derby from the far outside. Didn't run, he made steps forward, but didn't run probably as good as we were expecting early, but he did in this spot. It was a big effort, no matter what the number turns out. I mean, it's not like it's going to get bumped down to a 119 or something like that. It might be a 125, but that's still about as good as effort as we've seen on turf this year.
Yeah, I mean, these two 4-year-olds, Santine and Miramichi, they really did step up to the plate. Neither one of them were among the top players in this division going back a year to when they were 3-year-olds. Santine, I don't think, had even debuted until the summer, and Miramichi was just kind of, trying to get through his non-winners of one allowance condition about a year ago, but both of them have come a long way in the past year for some barns that tend to bring them along slowly. Brendan Walsh for Santine and Ian Wilkes for Miramichi. And they just kind of turned a corner coming off into their 4-year-old seasons, and especially Santine in this race. It feels like Brendan Walsh putting the blinkers on this horse made a big difference, because he had been one that kind of would run in spots, would come off the bridle a little bit early in his races, but he was much more focused on this occasion. You could see when Miramichi ranged up outside in the stretch, he really fought for the victory. So you want to see that moving forward, a horse that kind of knows where the line is and can win races like that. So Santine got it done. I was looking at some of the Trackus information from Churchill Downs on Saturday. I know that's not always the most reliable, because Trackus tends to have accuracy issues on a day like Derby Day when there are so many things interrupting the signal. But Santine and Miramichi, according to Trackus, were the two horses in this race that covered the most ground. Neither one of them was inside on either of the turns. So they definitely might have benefited from the way the track was playing. Whereas horses like Cheryl Spite and Tribhuvan were both inside the entire way. So you do want to pay attention to that when these horses run back, that maybe the margin of victory was exaggerated, that these two finished 6 lengths clear of the rest of the field. It doesn't really make sense based on the form coming in here. So sometimes, they might have been the two best horses, but maybe the margin should have been more like 2 lengths rather than 6.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was talking about with the way we do the figures. The margins get enhanced, overblown, I should say, depending on the softer the course gets, the more the fields tend to get gapped out. And I think we saw some of that here. So that is definitely the exact same point I was trying to make. You just made it a lot more succinctly.
Moving on to some of the other Grade 1 action on this Derby undercard. The Churchill Downs Stakes going 7 furlongs for the older males, won by the venerable Jackie's Warrior, 4-year-old coming back to really the top of his division now. He was the big favorite coming into the Breeders' Cup Sprint last year, Craig. I know he came out of that race with the knee chip. Some people were a little bit on the fence about his return at Oaklawn, but he got into the kind of pace situation where he's always going to be dangerous in this Churchill Downs, as there was just nobody to press him, and he strutted his stuff and was a pretty easy winner.
Yeah, he was. He certainly looked good visually. This was one of those races, it was kind of tough from a speed figure perspective. When you compare it to obligatory, just a couple races earlier, it was just a couple ticks faster. So it's one where he only got a 119 speed figure. It was a day, even though it was kind of a drying out track, where the track seemed to stay really consistent throughout. So it's one I'm going to revisit, but it could just be a case where Jackie's Warrior didn't have to go too fast for him, and he just kind of coasted home. I didn't watch this race that closely. Like I said, I was traveling this week and had a lot going on. I did see it live, but I didn't pay a whole lot of attention. But the figure kind of surprised me, and it looks like one of those we talked about in Arkansas this year. I think it was She Dares the Devil won a race, and it just looked slow for not just the winner, but all the horses, particularly for as easily as he won. But other than that, he looked good. I'm a little puzzled by the number.
Yeah, this is one that I actually was going to ask you about, because we saw some big speed figures that were surprisingly high early in the day at Churchill Downs on Saturday, and I was wondering if maybe you had considered that the track might have changed. I mean, if you're just kind of going on the face of things, comparing this race to the Pat Day Mile run a few hours before, which we're going to get to, I mean, the top 3 finishers in the Pat Day Mile all got higher speed figures than Jackie's Warrior. That seems a little bit hard for me to buy. All of the horses in this Churchill Downs regressed significantly off their prior numbers. I was just wondering if you considered maybe this race could be a breakout, and that could be tough if races were being run every half hour at Churchill Downs, but when you get late in the day on Derby Day, I mean, from the 8th race to the 12th race, there's about 4 hours between them, so, I mean, you do wonder if the track might have changed.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm considering, and I'm going to give this card a much longer look today. Because, yeah, there's a few, as you mentioned, the Pat Day Mile looks extremely fast, and not saying it's impossible, but it's one that, it's kind of iffy, and you bring up a good point about the Derby. I mean, some of these races, it's not your typical race card where a race 4 hours apart, or 4 races apart might only been, an hour and 10 minutes. We could be talking 3 hours here, and there was a lot of work being done on the track, particularly, some of these had intervening turf races, which would have extended the time even longer. So it's definitely one that I want to give a long look to, because there's a couple figures I'm just not all that comfortable with on first glance. And that's kind of how I do these. I go through, I make a first run. I even though I have a worksheet, it's not the same as looking at it in the chart. When all the numbers show up in the chart, I kind of get a look at it with fresh eyes, and then I'll go back and give it another go today.
Well, the female counterpart of that Churchill Downs stakes was the Derby City Distaff, which you kind of alluded to, Craig, won by obligatory. Very different pace situation, as this pace was surprisingly fast. Kind of a similar situation to what we saw in the Madison at Keeneland a month prior, where some horses that didn't necessarily look like they needed the lead were sent to the front, though in this case it was different horses. Actually, Just One Time, who was the deep closing winner of the Madison, she was surprisingly sent to the front here, and it set it up for obligatory, who on this occasion was the last mover.
Yeah, that was not sure what Flavian Pratt was doing there. It's hard to knock him. He's been riding so well, and one of the best riders in the game, if not the best. But that one was puzzling because just One Time's kind of been on a tear, has done so coming from off the pace. So I didn't get it, but it certainly changed the race. The early fractions are in bright red for being fast, and they were very fast. If there was a deeper shade of red we could use, I would, because the pace figures were in the 140s, which for a sprint is tougher to do than a route. That may not make sense, but horses are rated more in route races, so when they're really asked to run, it inflates the figures. In sprints, it's a little tougher to do because the baselines are a lot faster. So it was an interesting race. Obligatory got the perfect setup. She was rolling home. 115 speed figure, which is about what she runs all the time. It just kind of blew the race up the way it's set up. Just One Time actually got the best figure of her career in third with a 120 for being a part of that contested piece, and actually ran pretty well. She was right there till the last furlong when she just kind of dropped anchor.
Yeah, Just One Time, I thought, got an amazing ride to win the Madison. As you said, maybe the connections overthought this a little bit. I don't know if it was Flavian Pratt's decision or if Brad Cox decided that. You'll remember Brad Cox originally had two entrants in this race. One of them looked like she would be the speed, Lady Rocket, but they scratched her to run on Sunday. So Just One Time coming in as the closer. Maybe Brad Cox was thinking, there's less speed in the race now that I scratched my other speed, so we're going to use this one more aggressively. But it just seemed like others had that same idea, and the pace really did heat up. Just One Time, she might have run the best race of all. Obligatory got that fantastic setup that she's not going to encounter all the time. I think you do want to be careful with deep closers like Obligatory coming off performances like this. But the thing about Just One Time that you can't say about Obligatory is she has that versatility of running style where she can close from way back like she did in the Madison, or she can be used aggressively. And I think moving forward, that makes Just One Time the much more dangerous filly in these Grade 1 races moving into the summer and fall. Moving on to that race that we were alluding to a little bit earlier, Craig, that got the big speed figure, the Grade 2 Pate Mile. For the 3-year-olds going the 1 mile distance, this one, of course, featured the return of Jack Christopher, the early favorite for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year. Obviously did not get to participate in that race off his win in the Champagne. This was his return from the lengthy layoff, and you had to like what you saw.
Yeah, I did, and the speed figure, this is one where it's going to be a bit of a tougher call because there was a 1 mile race run exactly before this. And this is before the races were really spread out fairly early on the card. There was a race that Three Techniques won, a decent older horse who had kind of been out of form. I mean, he won at a big price, but there were some other consistent older horses in there. That figure was an easy one to make. They ran in the mid-teens. And then the Pate Mile comes, and they ran significantly faster, about, I want to say, 3/5 of a second faster, which is pretty notable for 3-year-olds. And so the way it came up for now, Jack Christopher ran big, and there's nothing that visually wouldn't confirm that. He looked like he ran big. He sat off of a fairly quick pace and just exploded home. He got a 126 TimeformUS speed figure. I think where it gets a little iffier is when you see the horses in behind them, and Papa Cap and My Prankster, who also ran career best at 123 and 120, and you can go down the list and see other horses ran some big numbers. So it's definitely one I got to look at, but I don't doubt that Jack Christopher ran a big race in here.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, Jack Christopher did not have the easiest start to this race. He kind of got bumped and squeezed back a little bit between horses. I think a lot of people expected him to secure the early lead coming out of the starting gate here. That didn't happen because of those early bumps. He had to sort of wait a little bit, come around to horses, get into that stalking position. But once he was able to be free running on the outside of Papa Cap, he just traveled into the race beautifully. Looked like a winner at the quarter pole, drew away. This was not a race, despite featuring an honest pace, Craig, this was not a race that fell apart in any sense. It was mostly dominated towards the front end. So that might have helped Jack Christopher a little bit, but he still showed up and ran a big race off the layoff. This is a seriously talented horse who has obviously not lost a step since last year. We'll see how much he stepped forward in subsequent starts. It sounds like Chad Brown is not going to run this horse back in the Preakness, as some were suggesting right after the race. I didn't think that was ever going to happen. But an early goal for this horse for the next start might be the Woody Stephens, which I think makes a lot of sense. Chad Brown has mentioned that as a slight turn back for him before stretching out later in the year. And the great thing about a horse like Jack Christopher is you have those options. He can go 7, but I mean, you want to see him try the mile and an eighth at the very least, perhaps in a race like the Haskell, because he gives every indication that he could be that kind of versatile horse.
Yeah, no doubt. And I can't knock the people that were talking Preakness because Chad Brown talked it himself. I saw it on the broadcast. Said he would have to talk with the connections and that it was possible. They'd have to see how the horse came out. But it seems like that's changed since the time. So it would have been a fun story. But that's very much against Chad Brown's MO to run a horse like this back in 2 weeks. So even as he was talking, I thought it would be kind of surprising.
Sticking with the 3-year-olds, moving back over to the turf course, we saw the Grade 2 American Turf run, I think just after this Pat Day Mile on Saturday. This one, a bit of an upset, Craig, as Stolen Base gets the job done over Balnikov. Felt like yet another race, though, that was somewhat affected by that way the turf course was playing, horses just rallying down the center of the racetrack. Though I gotta say, I thought Balnikov was making that winning move, kind of that balcony move coming around the far turn. Looked like he got to the front end, but Stolen Base was pretty game on the inside to battle back and get the victory for Mike Maker and Flavian Pratt.
Yeah, this is one, and I mentioned Flavian Pratt earlier. It's kind of hard to knock anything he does because he seems to be doing most things right these days. And this was definitely one of these cases where he did. He actually looked like he got passed by Balnikov, and he just was able to dig in, and find more and get this horse up. And he wound up winning by more than a length in the end. It looked like one where it was going to be nose and nose to the wire, but he actually just started pulling away. So. Great ride by him. The figure only came back a 107. It's kind of in line with what these 3-year-olds have been running. And as I've mentioned many times in the past, it seems like it takes the 3-year-olds on turf longer to catch up to the older horses than it does on the dirt. You very rarely are going to see big figures this time of year on the lawn.
Yeah, and this is one of many races that if you're a trip handicapper, I would go back and watch, take a note of the horses that spent a lot of time inside. They might be the ones that you want to follow from a wagering standpoint coming out of this race. I can just say off the top of my head, one of those horses might be Portfolio Company. Chad Brown, I think he often instructs his riders to try to save as much ground as possible on the turf courses, and wherever he is, that did not prove to be the right move at Churchill Downs on Friday or Saturday. So worth noting how some of those horses that stayed inside did and could improve in their subsequent starts.
Yeah, I'm hoping you'll do a couple of these on horses to watch. I don't remember if you stick to just NYRA races or not.
Well, these are Churchill replays, so unfortunately cannot show them. But I'm sure I'll talk about them when these horses run back, and we'll discuss some of them on the Pacecast or forecast when these horses run back in the future. Craig, let's wrap up the stakes action from that Saturday card with the biggest speed figure, at least biggest preliminary speed figure that you handed out from this weekend at Churchill Downs, and that was in the Grade 2 Distaff Turf Mile, won by the Chad Brown Peter Brandt U.S. import. Speak of the devil, this was her first start in this country, and boy, was it something to behold.
Yeah, it's tentatively at a 136. My guess is it's going to be bumped down when I change that track condition, probably to like a 132, at the worst a 130, which in any case is going to have her the best figure of the weekend, and I think deservedly so. This was something to behold. Maybe somewhat aided by the track, but when the track plays like it did, she certainly had a good setup that way. but pace-wise, she did not. There is a pace upgrade involved in this race too, so it was tricky for sure. But for me, I don't think there's much doubt that she ran the best race we saw all weekend. She was one that came over with a big time form rating last time in her win of a 125 and seemed to elevate it here. And I mean, for me, she probably jumped right to the top of the division. I guess it just depends how much you want to weigh the track in, but I think they could have been running on quicksand or moon dust, and they weren't going to beat her on this day.
Yeah, I remember when I was handicapping this race, I was watching some of her French races from last year and was really impressed with the turn of foot that she had displayed. She wasn't necessarily winning Group 1 races over there, but had run well in a couple of them, and just had looked like she was really doing well at the end of last year. And I was kind of wondering, wow, this must be a pretty expensive purchase. And I looked up her auction price, and Peter Brandt had shelled out just over $2.2 million for her at the Arcana sale in December last year. So looks like she's worth something close to that, Craig, based on this performance. She appears like she could be the next turf star for trainer Chad Brown. If not that, she seems like a very likely winner of the Just a Game on Belmont Day if they decide to go there. It just seems like she's tailor-made for that kind of race with this big turn of foot that she possesses. So, yeah, a really impressive performance. In addition to what you were saying, Craig, the turf condition maybe inflating the speed figure a little bit. The speed figure also could be inflated somewhat just by that track bias that we saw on the turf course on Friday and Saturday. She did make her move going wide from the 3/8 pole to the wire, so that might have inflated things a little bit further. So, take that number with a little bit of a grain of salt from if it stays at the 136. But definitely a performance that is worth noting, a real breakout effort for this filly, or I should say mare, and would not be surprised if we see a lot more grade 1s going into her column later in the season. Craig, let's finish up the Saturday action before we move on to Friday with one of the non-stakes races that got a big speed figure earlier in the day. We saw an allowance race for the 3-year-olds won by the Ken McPeak-trained Creative Minister. This one going the mile on the 16th, and this horse, it had been rumored to be a good one over the winter. I know he took a lot of money when he lost his debut at Gulfstream Park, but he's really stepped forward since then, and this was a big breakout effort for this guy.
Yeah, it was. He wound up with a 119 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort. As you said, he's done little wrong. It's the first time he was able to do 2 turns on a dry track, and he sure looked good doing it. It's not like the pace was crazy fast. It was pretty even up front, and he was able to just inhale this field, and I really liked what I saw from him. I'm not sure what the future plans are for him, but he looks like a good one who I almost has to be in a graded stakes company next out based on this effort.
I did see him on the possible list of Preakness horses. That might be a little too much too soon for him. We'll see what they ultimately decide. I know Big Peak has said he's likely to have a horse in the Preakness, depending on who he decides to run. This horse did run, though, the same speed figure that Rich Strike got in the Kentucky Derby for what it's worth. Very different circumstances, different kind of field, different points in the day, so maybe don't put too much stock in that, but clearly this is a horse that took a big step forward here, so won't be surprised when there are eventually graded stakes in his future. Let's move back to Friday's card and talk about some of the races that were run on the undercard of the Kentucky Oaks. The other grade 1 on Friday, Craig, was the La Troyenne. This one was the showdown between She Dares the Devil and Pauline's Pearl. And gotta say, She Dares the Devil took most of the money here, but I didn't see a big excuse for her. She just got run down.
Yeah, it was a race. I would say it wasn't, even though it was only a half length between them, I would argue that Pauline's Pearl was actually much the best in here. She was able to overcome what was just a moderate pace at best. And not only was it just moderate, she was on a clear lead, She Dares the Devil. And Pauline's Pearl just came and got her. It's not like anybody else really challenged her. It was just basically a match race, and hard for me to argue that she wasn't the best horse. She just outran She Dares the Devil on this day. Not a whole lot to add. They both got 117 speed figures for the effort, but for me, Pauline's Pearl was the clearly better filly.
Yeah, Pauline's Pearl was coming out of that Azeri at Oaklawn, a race that had come up surprisingly slow. We have seen horses improve out of that race, but it is worth noting Pauline's Pearl had completely blown the start that day. It actually ran really well to be second to Cece, and she showed that performance was no fluke here. As you said, she was just the best horse, running down She Dares the Devil, who had no excuse. And Craig, I've seen this a few too many times from She Dares the Devil. Getting great trips, still getting run down. It just feels like ever since winning that Kentucky Oaks, she's just been a little bit of a disappointment. She's run some big races on occasion, has won a few grade ones, but when push comes to shove, it just feels like sometimes she lacks that extra punch to really secure the victory.
Yeah, no argument for me on that. I know she's won some grade ones, but when I view her PP, she's not a horse I view as a true grade one horse. She tends to not run as well against the better horses and just kind of beats up on horses when she catches a weaker field. And Pauline's Pearl is a horse who at one time I would have said was among those kind of weaker. She, ran in lower class late races, but she just keeps getting better, where She Dares the Devil is just kind of stayed the same throughout her career. I think Pauline's Pearl's moving in the right direction.
Craig, one Friday race that I'm kind of interested to get your take on is the Grade 2 Ali Sheba, which I guess is kind of the male counterpart of the La Troyenne. This one for the older males going a mile in the 16th. And what are we supposed to make of a horse like Olympiad? I think he's won all of his starts this year, but when I look through his TimeformUS charts, it feels like every race that he runs in has those blue color-coded fractions. He's just found one slow pace after another, and he's able to finish really fast in these races, but what do we make of that moving forward? Is this really a grade one type of horse, or is he just getting one perfect trip after another?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough call for me. I would say no, not at this point. He isn't one because, yeah, he does make his trip because he has good early speed. But when you look back at the horses he's beating, let's be honest, before Friday, it wasn't a huge list of horses who have gone on to do great things so far off the top of my head. So to me, he seems more like a grade 2, grade 3, which is what the Ali Sheba was. And that's how I'm going to view him until he does something different. He got a 121 again, even though the final time was a 125. He did show some determination. He actually got passed by Happy Saver at the top of the lane. It looked like Happy Saver was going to run right by him. He dug down, and it wasn't particularly close at the end. He was able to pull away for Junior Alvarado. So really good horse, but when I look through it, I see he had everything his own way. He was still, tight already. He was back in third. I don't think he's going to make anybody's list of top horses. Wayburn, who's okay, was probably pushing his distance limitations, and here was in fourth. So I still can't get too excited about Olympiad.
He did get a 125 final time number. Obviously, that's knocked down a little bit because of the slow pace to the 121 TimeformUS speed figure. But I guess the thing that kind of fascinates me about him is he's got this strong closing kick, but he kind of closes off his own fractions. And with a horse like this, do you think that you want to stretch him out to more distance? I know that Bill Mott mentioned a race like the Whitney during the summer is maybe that's where they take the shot against a grade 1 company. I could see him getting 9 furlongs if he gets the right kind of pace setup. Or is this the kind of horse that maybe could turn back in distance because he has that strong closing kick, but what we haven't seen from him is that ability to close from further back in the pack. He's able to close from, second or third without taking kickback racing in the clear. It's kind of a different story when you have to produce that kick coming from back in the pack and navigating traffic, and we haven't really seen that from Olympiad.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at. Like, if this horse was to show up in the Met Mile, I wouldn't think very highly of him. Like, an immediate comparison for me would be Speaker's Corner, and I would take Speaker's Corner over him every time. Now, I'm not saying Olympiad couldn't beat him. I'm just saying we haven't seen it, and he's probably going to be a shorter price. And I'm in your camp where I think he would do better off going longer, where he's almost assuredly going to be able to relax, be right up front, setting those slower fractions. And instead, he certainly can finish off his races. So I have seen nothing that would indicate he can't go farther. I mean, we saw him go a mile and an eighth at the fairgrounds. Obviously not the same kind of competition he'll be facing going forward, but he certainly finished that one off. So Bill Mott's a Hall of Famer. He's going to do the right thing, I'm sure. But if you were asking me, I'd say stretch him out and keep him going longer.
We saw 3 graded stakes on the Friday card run on the turf course. Among those was the Grade 3 Modesty for the fillies and mares, going the 1.125 distance. And Craig, she's not running the biggest speed figures in this division, but Bleecker Street just seems to have that nose for the wire. She gets there first, now 6 for 6 in her career. I don't know how far she's going to be able to take this winning streak beyond this, but she just continues to show up every time.
Yeah, she is relentless through the lane. She picked up Flavie and Prat for this ride. Didn't seem to matter very much. What impressed me the most, that she only got a 114 speed figure. We know she's been able to run quicker than that in the past. And I think part of that was because there just wasn't a lot of pace. It wasn't slow enough that it coated any of the fractions in blue, but it had a long shot set in the lead and a pretty tepid opening quarter. And then it picked up a little bit, but it shouldn't have been a race where she was able to win. Now, maybe the speed horses just weren't any good and the finish would kind of indicate that. But I think that probably held the speed figure back more than anything. She's a good horse. I'm not saying that, for example, she could jump up and win a Grade 1 anytime soon. But she's just a cool story to see her keep reeling off these wins and doing it under not always the best circumstances.
Yeah, it wasn't the strongest race in the world. Chad Brown sent out clearly the 2 best horses on paper in Bleecker Street and Fluffy Socks, and Bleecker Street just had that extra oomph at the end to push past her stablemate. They both got good trips. Neither was really inside for much of the way, which is not where you wanted to be, even on that turf course on Friday. So they both ran well. Bleecker Street, she's going to have to elevate her speed figures a little bit if she's going to tackle some of those Grade 1 races later in the season. Like maybe the Diana could be a long-term goal for her, but I think she's going to have to improve because I'm not sure that she would have been able to win if she had contested that race won by her Chad Brown trained stablemate Speak of the Devil the next day.
Right. If there was one horse I would keep an eye on out of here, it was the 5th place finisher, She Can't Sing, who spent most of the time inside, got blocked in the stretch. Actually looked like she had some run and was coming late to only be beat a few lengths. So just based on the track condition, she's one I'd give another chance.
One race where the turf condition seemed to really have an impact on the results was the Grade 2 Edgewood, going a 1.16 for the 3-year-old fillies, as New Year's Eve got the kind of trip that you wanted to work out. Luis Saez, from an outside post, I guess, didn't really have the option of saving ground, but not saving ground proved to be a real benefit because this filly made a big run out in the clear, got to wind up coming off the far turn. She must have been at about the 8 or 9 path coming into the stretch, but seemed like that was where you wanted to be, and she just drew away from this field pretty impressively.
Yeah, and the fractions were a little on the quick side early. Only one of them's in red, but the others were kind of borderline, and everything just kind of came together for New Year's Eve and Brendan Walsh here. She ran a 114 speed figure. Don't have a lot to add. She just took advantage of the pace of the racetrack, but it was a good effort from her. You know, it's not like she got up to win by a nose. She had taken command, I think, before they even hit the furlong pole pretty easily, and always looked like a winner through the lane.
Yeah, I mean, she was 14-1, but it's not like she had run badly in her prior races. She's now 3 for 4 in her career. Obviously took a huge step forward in this race, but she had displayed a nice closing kick at the fairgrounds, just did it against much tougher company here. Like I was saying, probably aided by the way the track was playing. Also, it's worth noting, she was facing 3 rivals from the Chad Brown stable here, and all of them rode the rail for almost their entire trips. So that might have exaggerated the margin between New Year's Eve and all of the Chad Brown runners. I would say that McCulloch, who was second, ran really well because she was inside almost the entire way, did peel out at the top of the stretch, but New Year's Eve had just gotten the jump on her by that point. I thought that McCulloch finished really well to be second, and I'd rate these 2 horses pretty similarly coming out of this race, even though New Year's Eve won by almost 3 lengths.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. That was the one horse I was going to point out because, as you said, they sat on the rail, and normally ground saving is the place to be in turf races, but every now and then you get these drying out courses, and it's the complete opposite.
A little bit later in the day on that Oaks card at Churchill Downs Friday, we saw the turf sprint, the Twin Spires turf sprint, going the 5.5 furlongs, won by the Wesley Ward trained Arrest Me Red. And boy, Craig, it seems like Wesley Ward just has a stranglehold on this turf sprint division right now. I think he's already covered for those two big races at Royal Ascot, but I wouldn't be surprised if Arrest Me Red jumped on the plane too, because he's a pretty nice horse in his own right.
Yeah, he was. He's a horse that I just always seem to try to beat, and it never really works out. He had lost last time at Gulfstream, but we've talked about it before, particularly at that 5 furlong distance. It's just really kind of, if you don't have the speed to get to the front in those races, you're really up against it. And I liked what I saw from him on Friday. I thought it was a big effort. He got a 120 speed figure for the day. He showed good tactical speed, sitting right there on the pace, and it's not like speed did well. All the horses who finished in the 2, 3, 4 slots were behind him. All the speed dropped out of the race pretty quick. So I thought it was a legitimately good effort. And it's just so many good sprinters from the Ward barn. I can't even keep track of them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, typically you wouldn't say it was a great trip for Arrest Me Red because he was 4 to 5 wide around the far turn. But like we were saying, you didn't really want to be riding that rail path, and you could see coming to the stretch for this race. I mean, there were probably 8 horses strung across the racetrack in all different paths on this turf course. Gregorian Champ was the one that was maybe closest to the inside. Him and Caravel, they were both trying to come up the inside and got stalled a little bit in the late stages. But Arrest Me Red at the end of the day won this pretty decisively by nearly 2 lengths. And just as a horse that knows how to win, keeps showing up, he's got that dangerous tactical speed that ensures that he almost always gets a good trip in these races. And I would say that it's unlikely Wesley sends him over to Royal Ascot because, like I was alluding to, he's already got Campanelli and, of course, Golden Pal for the 2 major sprint races out there. But seems like a logical spot for him could be the Grade 1 Jaipur on Belmont Stakes Day. He'd be a dangerous horse going 6 furlongs because we've seen him do that before. Let's move back to the main track to wrap up the racing from Friday at Churchill Downs, talking about a couple of performances by 3-year-old fillies from the Brad Cox stable. The one that won at Graded Stakes was the 8 Bells winner Matarea, a horse that just seems like she's turned a corner ever since Brad Cox turned her back in distance earlier this year. She's put forth one dominant effort after another.
Yeah, she turned back and she had run that big allowance race at the fairgrounds. It had a 1:11 final time figure. Then she was able to win the Beaumont on the Beard course, the about 7 furlong distance with a big 1:15 speed figure. And she showed she could carry it to Churchill because she won pretty easily with a 1:14, a big effort from her. So yeah, I'm not sure if there's any plans to stretch her back out or not because she's winning so easily. It makes it look like she wants to, but she looks like the top sprinter to me right now. She's running fast. I wouldn't mess with anything personally and just pick spots, especially at the 7 furlong distance. I just think she's always going to be really dangerous given her good tactical speed, and then she finishes off the races.
Yeah, this was a pretty good field. Horses like Pretty Birdie, Marissa's Lady, they had done some winning of stakes earlier in the year. Pretty Birdie had run some big speed figures, and she ran one here. I thought Pretty Birdie ran well to be second in this race, but Matarea just ran right by her at about the 8th pole and went on to another fairly comfortable victory here. I think this would set up a pretty interesting matchup between her and Echo Zulu in the Acorn. I know that Echo Zulu, her connections have already announced that she is targeting the Acorn. I haven't seen them say that about Matarea, but that would appear to be a logical spot for her, and I think that'd be a pretty fun rivalry.
Yeah, that would be a good matchup because, yeah, I wasn't really thinking of Echo Zulu as more a one-turn type, but I know we discussed it earlier. There's no reason to think she couldn't drop back. I mean, she's already proven she could run the good one-turn mile at Belmont. And, yeah, these two would throw it down because they have the speed figures that are close to each other. They both have good tactical speed, so, yeah, it would be a great showdown to see.
And the other Brad Cox filly that we saw with a nice speed figure on that Friday card was Juju's Map, who won an allowance race earlier in the day, not facing the same quality of field that Matarea did. Juju's Map was the heavy favorite in this race, but just nice to see her get back on track, because I'm sure you remember, Craig, this was a horse that I liked quite a bit at the end of last year. Wasn't quite able to stick with Echo Zulu in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, but seems like, as she should have, she's taken a step forward since then.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think she was my pick in the distaff as well. I liked her race at Keeneland, the prep, the Alcibiades that she ran. She ran big speed figures going in, and she certainly wasn't embarrassed in the juvenile filly. She finished a good second, even though 5 lengths back. And I thought her return race was really nice. She got a 113 speed figure for the effort, and I would imagine she's gonna journey right in the stakes competition. Not sure where they're going to go. I mean, it was a pretty long layoff. I think it was about 6 months for her, so maybe not jump right in back into the top class. But then again, that's how things usually go in racing these days. Horses don't run as much as they used to, so maybe they will throw her right back in with the big ones. But I liked what I saw. As I said, she went right to the front. It wasn't the toughest field, but she set a good, honest pace and just drew away pretty easily. So, yeah, good effort.
Yeah, the Black Eyed Susan might come up a little bit quick, though that would otherwise be a logical spot for her. I'm sure there are some races at Churchill Downs that'll fit her at the stakes level moving forward. But yeah, she's one that I would not be surprised if she's able to kind of make her presence felt in this division by the time we get to Saratoga over the summer, because she looked pretty good last year and feels like one where distance is really going to be her friend, which might not be the case for Echo Zulu moving forward after having beat her in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies last year. Well, Craig, we got through it all. We recapped all the stakes action from those Oaks and Derby cards. A lot of it's kind of overwhelming to take in as it's happening, but definitely worth looking back at because there are some trips worth paying attention to, track biases, and just some great storylines to look back on from then. So much to look forward to at this time of year. We already talked a little bit about the Preakness. We will, of course, record our TimeformUS forecast later this week. I believe Belmont has a nice card coming up. It's their Grade 1 Man Award Day. I think they have something like 4 or 5 graded stakes, so maybe we could take a look at that when we do our forecast later in the week.
Yeah, I'm always happy to do Belmont. I haven't looked ahead. I'm kind of taking it easy for not really taking it easy. Still got plenty of figures to make, but just mentally taking a little downtime. As I mentioned, I am going to give that Churchill card a really good look over today, particularly the turf races. And I will post all the figures. We didn't get to cover any other circuits just because there were so many so many races at Churchill. But for sure, I will post all the figures. I saw some big efforts, particularly at Belmont, that I will want to get the numbers out there. So I'll put them up on Twitter. I'm sure Timeform US will retweet them as well.
Well, everybody, that's it for the Pacecast this week. Remember that you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch our TimeformUS forecast coming up later in the week.